sponsors for this week are Aaron Kislasi for the refuah shlema of Grazia bat Misoda, his mother, and Hadra bat Esther, his mother-in-law, and for an Elias Neshama for Nehemiah Yisrael Meir ben Malka, and also Daf Yomi sponsor this week by Dan Stern in honor of Rabbi and Rebbetzin Avram and Rachel Giselson. We are at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 lines up from the bottom on Yud Chesed Beis on 18b. Amar Rav Papa. The last thing that we had talked about was we mentioned that the king can't sit on the Sanhedrin because once the king speaks, then nobody can contradict him, and then that's going to be the end of the case. And then we don't put the king or the Kohen Gadol onto courts that are calculating whether you need to put an extra month in, because the king is going to get a free month of army service out of it, and the Kohen Gadol might get cold feet, literally, right? So he's going to want to be able to have Yom Kippur in a warmer season. Amar Rav Papa says, Shema Mina, we see from here that Shasa Basar Yarcha Azil, that the seasons, the temperature is going to go based on whatever the Hebrew month is. And actually, it worked out this year, right? Tishrei was much later in the solar calendar. Nevertheless, Tishrei was still relatively mild. It didn't snow in the middle of November middle of October this year, despite the fact that Tishrei was...
not this year, it's last year.
Last year, correct, yep. So, Ini... Is that true though? There were three shepherds. They were by each other, and the rabbis overheard them talking, and they were saying, Chad Amar, one of them said, Im bakir v'lakish kechad yenatz, if the wheat, which was planted first, and the barley, which was planted second, so if they grow out of the ground, they ripen at the same time, so then Dain Hu Adar, that is a symbol that the season is Adar. It's a good indication that you're coming up to spring, because the wheat was planted in the winter. We have winter wheat, and it gets planted in the winter time, but it grows and finally ripens eventually, but usually it'll ripen earlier than the barley planting, which was much quicker to grow and to ripen. But if the
have Adar due to this situation as well?
Sorry, why would we put two Adars?
Purim. Is that why you do Purim? Is that why you have Purim in Adar as well?
Purim in Adar is because that's when it happened, right? So, but the fact that these two things happen at the same time indicates that this month should be Adar. V'im lav, if not, leis dein Adar, then this should not be Adar, right? Because we're going to wind up having things growing and sprouting at the wrong times. V'chad Amar 1 says, Im tur b'tzafar b'telig yamus, if an ox in the morning gets up and it's freezing cold, right? That ox gets close to dying, ubetiara, and then by the afternoon, batal te'ene yidmuch. So it's scratching its skin off against a tree in order to be able to itch because it's so hot. So Yishlach Mashchei, it's going to scrape off its skin. Dain Hu Adar, that is what makes Adar. Ve'im lav, if not, leis Dain Adar, that's not Adar. V'chad Amar once said, Im kidun tokif lechada yehei yipach blocha naflik likablei. If the strong wind is blowing and then you face that wind and you exhale against that wind, that still warms up the wind. In other words, it's mild temperatures already, so that your breath is already strong enough to heat up the cold air that's coming at you. So then Dain Hu Adar, that's Adar. Ve'im lav, if not, leis Dain Adar. V'avrua Rabbanan lahi shasta, and based on that, the Rabbanan followed their lead, and they established that year to be a leap year in order to put the seasons into order.
Didn't we say last? I'm sorry, I probably missed the opening, but didn't we say that when they name the month, when they dictate the month, that the weather follows, that the character...
That's what we're talking, that's why we're discussing, right. Correct. So like they're using the fact that this is what's going on at this time to determine what Hebrew month this should be. Okay, so that's what they're saying. 1 second. So fine. So the answer is, so therefore the Chachamim heard and they realized that since these things had not come true yet, they said that it's still Chodesh Shvat. Okay, and the Chachamim made that an extra year. Right, basically making this Adar into Shvat by making an extra Adar on top of it. And so therefore, they were recognizing that Adar Sheni is going to be warm like Nisan, right? They're going to make it overly warm, and so therefore you see that the season is not coming out at the appropriate time of the month. So that's the question, right? If the months are supposed to be, the Hebrew months are supposed to be following, so that seems to be a contradiction to that statement. V'tisbera rabbanan aravusa samach. The answer is no, because really the weather was only one factor. That is fair, but remember, that's not what the Rabbanan were really relying on. El Rabbanan, achush b'naihu samach, the Rabbanan were relying on their calculations, as we discussed. V'roi bakar, istayuihu de istaya milsaihu. But the fact is that these extra statements that these shepherds were making was supportive of the decision that they were making. Okay, next section, cholitz v'choltzin. We're talking about the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol can do chalitza, right? If his brother's wife dies, so then he can do chalitza, and v'choltzin, if he dies, then his brother can do chalitza for his wife. So kapasik v'tani lo shna min ha'erusin v'lo shna min nisuin. Now then it continues on and it says that the Kohen Gadol can't do yibum, right? That he can't do. Why? Because the wife of his brother, after his brother dies, is a widow. And a Kohen Gadol cannot marry a widow. Now, why does the Mishnah just say that that is a fact? Doesn't it depend on a widow at what stage of the marriage process they were in? Because if she is if the erusin took place, right, then she's still they've never had relations, right? She's still basula. If it's after nisuin, then I understand, right? But after erusin, they haven't lived together yet. So what makes her an almana? So bishlam min nisuin havi ase velosase. I understand what's going on, right? Because the Kohen, there's two mitzvos that he has to worry about when he's marrying a widow. He has to not marry a widow, and he has to marry a basula, somebody who's never had relations. Those are two mitzvos, a positive and a negative one. Right. Okay? Now, turning the page onto Yud Testament Aleph, Vein ase doche lo sase v'ase. Now, there is a positive commandment to do yibum. Right? He's being told by the Torah to do yibum. So he's got, on the one hand, a positive commandment, do yibum. On the other hand, he has a negative commandment, don't marry a widow, and a positive commandment to marry somebody who's a basula. Okay, so I understand why, if she's not a basula, why we can't marry her. I get that. Ella min ha'erusin amai. So if all she is an erusin, if she's widowed from erusin, so then why shouldn't the yibum take place? Yavo ase v'yid chalos ase. The positive commandment that he has to do yibum should overrule the negative commandment of not marrying a widow, as far as the positive commandment to marry a basula that he is doing. There's no problem with that. So therefore, he's not violating any prohibition. He's not violating a positive commandment by marrying somebody who's not a basula. He's only got the losase. And we have the rule generally is that when there's a positive commandment against a negative commandment, the positive commandment wins. Right? Because the Torah basically says that whenever there's a negative commandment, the positive commandment not only cancels it, but essentially says that negative commandment doesn't exist. So Gzeira Bia Rishona Atu Bia Shnia, the answer is because we have a problem. The mitzvah of doing yibum only applies to the first time that the person has relations with his new wife. So if this Kohen were to marry his brother's wife, right, his former brother's wife, so then the first time that they're together, great, that's yibum, that's wonderful. But the second time, it's not yibum anymore. He already did the mitzvah of yibum. So now he's just involved in a negative commandment. So therefore the rabbis came along and said, you know what? We're pretty sure that once they get married, they're not going to separate. Therefore, don't get married in the first place because you'll only be allowed to have relations one time. So therefore, don't get married in the first place. That was their rule. Because the second time is going to be prohibited. The first time is yibum. The first time they have relations, that's going to be yibum. Right. Positive commandment is going to push off the negative commandment. The second time they have relations, there's no mitzvah of yibum anymore. They already did it.
But he's not getting married again.
Right.
Like each time.
That's crazy.
How is that?
But the mitzvah.
It's not a new act of getting married. Right?
But every time he has relations, he is in violation of the prohibition of the lo saseh of having relations with an almana. Of being a rich. Correct. Yes. That's correct.
You're saying also she can't do a chalitza.
So chalitza, we said they could do. Right?
They could. Oh,
Cholitz v'choltzin, right? They
Right,
could do
right,
chalitza,
right.
Yibum they could not do. It also answers a problem that we would have with the Gemara, which is that generally speaking, Maseches Yibum, we learn the rule is that if you can do Yibum, you can do chalitza. If you can't do Yibum, then you also can't do chalitza. The two things go hand in hand. This is a very weird case. He is not able to do Yibum, but he is allowed to do chalitza. How is that working? The answer is because really, he is allowed to do Yibum. It's just Xera D'Rabbanan not to do the Yibum, but he can still do Chalitza. Tanya Nami Hach, we have a brisa as well that says like this: In Kadmu Balu Biarishone. Let's say the Kohen Gadol does this anyway. He goes and he says, you know what? Doesn't ask. He just they go they have relations and they do Yibum. So Kanu the Asula Kaiman B'Biyashniya. They're married. It worked, but they're not supposed to stay married. They've got a divorce. They can't stay married a second time. Okay, so next, mace, lo mace. Now the next circumstance, the Kohen Gadol has somebody who is a close relative who dies. So we said that it's machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says that he is not allowed to go behind the casket. He has to keeping a distance going around the corners, right? And Rabbi Yehuda says he can't leave the Beis HaMikdash.
And in these cases, we go by Rabbi Meir.
So we're going to go by Rabbi Yehuda, right? So
just to go back to your statement where you said that they both
so not the Rabbanan. Sorry,
where you said Chalitza and Yibum go together.
Yes.
It doesn't if it's an Almana, because then he can't do Chalitza. He could do Chalitza, but he can't do Yibum.
But the Yibum is only a rabbinic problem, not a Torah problem.
No, so but if she's an Almana Mamish, like if she
that's correct. Yes, that's correct.
So that's why I said they don't go
it would seem correct that there is such a case of Chalitza, but I would think that you are right. If it's Minan Nesuin, then potentially I wonder if they could do Chalitza. It's a good question. I'm going to have to take a look here, see if anybody answers that. Hang on a second. Did anybody address that issue? Go back to the Mishnah for a second. A fair question. Right, as far as Cholzin. I'll have to take a look at that later. Okay, it's a good question. I'm not sure why they could do chalitza if Yibum is not acceptable. It could be that, like you said, it's only under a circumstance where it's mina irusin that makes a difference. But it seems like the Mishnah doesn't specify, so that's a good question. All right, we'll have to look that up. Tana Rabbanan, mina migdash lo yetze. That he's not we said that he's not allowed to leave the migdash lo yetze imahen. That Rabbi Meir interprets to mean that he cannot go out with the funeral procession. That's all it means, right? Can't go with the funeral procession. Aval yotzehu acharehen, but he can go out after the funeral procession. Ketzad, how does that work? Hein nichsin v'hu nigla. They go in. He goes out. Hein niglin. They go out. V'hu nichsa, and he goes in. Now v'yotzead Pesach, and then he can go and follow the funeral procession all the way to the gate of the city. Shopper Kamer is in Rabbi Yehuda says, what are you talking about? It says lo yetze. He can't go out of the Beis HaMikdash. So Rabbi Yehuda's got a great point. Read the pasuk. That's what it says. He can't go out. So how do you explain that? So Shopper Kamer Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda's giving a good answer. Amar lach Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says no. Iachi leveso nami lo. If that's the explanation, so that means the Kohen Gadol can't go home. What happens at the end of the day, work's over, you can't go home. This is what it means. It means that you can't leave the mikdash, means that he can't ever leave his status of being Kodesh. He always have to be in a status of being Kodesh, so therefore he can't attend the funeral. And Rameir says, but since we're going to establish some sort of method to keep him distant from the funeral procession, that's going to be okay.
Like a mechitza, some sort of mechitza.
Or we said he's going to at least not stay in visual contact, right? That's what he's going to do. For Rabbi Yehuda says, Agav mirare, since he's overly bitter and distressed, Dilma Mikri v'asiv v'naga, that he's going to go through, he's going to break the rules, and he's going to go after the funeral procession. And so, therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says we're going to go one step further and say he shouldn't attend at all. Next, Kishu Menachem, when he is being...
But he would agree that he can go home at night.
That's correct, yes. So that in the end he does agree to that. Yes, so when you are being Menachem, so Tanur Rabbanan, Kishu over Beshura, Lenachem Esachir, when the Kohen Gadol is going in this line, like we discussed, that line of comforters that were walking past the mourner, right?
So Sgan u'mashuach she'over b'mino. So the Sgan, the deputy Kohen, we'll explain what that is, and the Mashuach, that's the we'll explain that in a second. U'mashuach she'over, that is the Kohen Gadol that is immediately past. What happens is that if this Kohen Gadol, for some reason, winds up being ineligible to do the service, let's say, for example, he breaks his arm, so now he's got a temporary mum, can't perform service, and so therefore they install a backup Kohen Gadol to take his place. That Kohen Gadol steps in. Now, this Kohen Gadol heals and he goes back to his service. What do you do with the guy who was the temporary Kohen Gadol?
You put him on hold. You put him on call.
That's correct. So he's on hold, right? He's the Mashuach She'avar. He doesn't go back to being a regular Kohen because he was a Kohen Gadol for a while. He can't stay the service because now there's a Kohen. So he's the Mashuach She'avar. He's the one who is anointed, immediately passed. So those guys stand bimino to his right. Verosh Beis Av, and the head of the Kohen family of that week, right? There was a family of Kohanim that have a rotation, and each week would have one of the families. The head of that family would stand to his left, Va'avelim v'kol ha'am mismalo, and the mourners and all of the nation were to his left as well. And then he would file on through with the people and be able to provide comfort to the mourners. Ukeshaomed b'shura, when he's standing in the line, u'misnachem me'achirim, so he's receiving comfort from others. So now he's on the receiving end. So then Skan Mimino, the deputy Kohen, stands to his right. V'rosh Beis Av v'kol ha'am mismalo, the head of the family of Kohanim, and the rest of the nation are to his left. Aval Mashuach She'avar lo asi gabe, but the Mashuach She'avar, he's not there. He doesn't come. My time, what's the reason why we don't invite the immediate past Kohen? Chol Shadase, because this is going to bother the Kohen. There's a competition going on between these two guys. This guy, he knows that he can step up. He's the understudy. So if the lead Kohen Gadol ever steps out, then he gets to step in. So that makes the Kohen Gadol feel a little bit threatened by this guy. He's probably happy that I'm a Avil right now, and it makes me feel miserable to have him around. Therefore, out of sensitivity for the Kohen Gadol, we don't invite the Mashuach She'avar when the Kohen Gadol is the mourner. Savar kachadibi, he's going to think that he's laughing at me. Amar of Papa says, Shma min hamihamas nisa tlos. We're going to learn three things from this Mishnah. Shma mina, number one, Hainu Sgan, Hainu Mamuna. The first of all is, what is the Sgan? This deputy is the Mamuna. He is the one who is the person who is. Let's see, the Sgan is the Mamuna. Those are the same fellows. This deputy Kohen is the same, it's a different word for the same thing. The Mamuna was the one who was appointed in order to bring the nation out to war. That's what we had said. So the Sgan is the same person as that person, right? Because our Mishnah uses one word and this Brisa uses a different word. Those words are interchangeable. Ushmami non number two, Avelim ondim b'chol ha'am ovrin. The Avelim stand still, and all the people who are comforting walk past the mourners. That's how the procession went. Ushmamina, and the third thing is Avelim lismol, that the mourners stand to the left. Menachem hein lismol hamenachem, to the left side of those that are comforting them. Hein omdim. Tana Rabbanan, number. Rabbis. At first, the custom was that the mourners were standing, and the nation would walk, the people would walk past and wish their condolences. There were two families in Yerushalayim, Misgaros Zubazu, that got into a fight. Each one wanted to go first in the line of mourning. They felt that they were more honorable family and they should go first. So they said, forget it. The people are going to stand still, and the mourners can go walk. And that's what they changed it to. Amar Rami Bar Abba. Rami Bar Abba says, Hechzir Rabbi Yossi as a davar liyoshno. Rabbi Yossi put it back the old way. Once I guess the problem went away, and you didn't have these families in Yerushalayim fighting over things anymore, so he put it back the old way. But Tzipuri, Shiyu Avelim Omdim, that the Avelim would stand still, V'cholam overin, and the nation would walk past them. V'amar Rami Bar Abba. Rabbi Abba says, Hiskin Rabbi Yossi, but Tzipuri, Rabbi Yossi made the following establishment in Tzipuri, Shalotehe Isham Halechas B'Shuk. He also established established. These are the things that he established. That Rami Bar Abba is saying these are some rules that are established. That's what the common denominator between these things is that there was a woman who was going in the market. That women going in the marketplace, ubna achareha, and their son, her child should not go behind her. Why? Mishum ma'aseh shahaya, because the story that happened. Rashi explains. The story was that her child. There was a woman going in the street, and her child was behind her, and somebody came by and kidnapped the child. And she turned around, and the child's gone, and so she's screaming, yelling, "Where's my child? Where's my child?" And a guy pops up and says, "I'll show you where your child is. Come with me." And she went back to the house with this fellow, and he assaulted her. So therefore, as a result, they said, your children go in front. That way
That's
you see.
why you never trust those little people.
And don't trust a lot of people. Rabbi Baba also says he's going to be able to be true. Another thing that Rabbi Yossi established in Sipuri, sheyu noshim misparos bebeis hakise. Women should talk in the bathroom. I don't know how he had to establish that. Isn't that like natural? Isn't like the way it goes? So he says the women have got to schmooze in the bathroom. Why? Mishum yichud. We're going to discuss the rules of yichud, but the problem is going to be that they had public bathrooms and they did not have a separate public bathroom for men and for women. So therefore, if they wanted to be able to make sure that a guy doesn't walk in when the ladies are there,
Lock the door.
well, they didn't have locks on the doors. They were told talk while they're in the bathroom. If they're talking in the bathroom, then somebody would come to the door and realize people are in there and not come in. Amarav Menashia bar Avas Sheilas es Rabbi Yoshaya Rabba bebeis Almin. Right, I asked Rabbi Yoshaya the following question in the Beis Almin, which is either the name of a place or it is a graveyard, de Hutzal, in a place called Hutzal. The Amar lady said to me, Ein shura pechosa me'asar b'nei adam. The lineup for comforting the mourners, it has to be at least 10 people. Ve'ein avelim min minyan, and the avelim don't count in the minyan. Bein shavelim omdim v'chol ha'am ovrin, bein shavelim ovrin v'chol ha'am omdim, and you could do it either way. Either the people, the mourners could do the walking, or the comforters could do the walking.
They can't be counted in the minyan.
They can't be counted in the minyan. Now that's interesting. Why is it that the Avelim don't count in the minyan? Because there is to the distinction between that and where a chassan is at his sheva brachos and he can be counted in minyan, right? The answer is because for when it comes to Avelim, they're being comforted. Right, they're not part of the. You need a group of people. You need the minyan that's doing the comforting. He's the object of the mitzvah that is being comforted. But when it comes to the chassan, he's happy together with everybody else. They're having a common celebration, so he can be part of the minyan.
Is that another reason why you can't do mitzvahs to be part of a minyan until you do the funeral?
No, because osik b'mitzvah pater min mitzvah. Right, that is the rule. There is that if I'm already involved, if I have an obligation to take care of this mace, bury this mace, I can't be distracted by doing anything else. So that'll be something we will discuss when we get to Masechus Moekotim, which will be
does that
sometime.
Osik means pater min mitzvah, but when you're not burying, you still don't put on tefillin. Like it doesn't matter if the body.
The onain is in that state, right? Correct.
So is it really Osik?
He's also that's a different issue because of Torah that you are in a status of being not mentally settled to be able to do those things. The tefillin is a different story altogether. Okay, Keshu Menas Misnachim. So now, when he is giving comfort, so the question is, Ki Menachim Hu Acharini Hechi Amar Luhu. When we said, if they're comforting him, they walk by and they say, where are your kapara, right? And he says, okay, you should be blessed. What if he is giving comfort to them? So Tashma, so come and listen. Vehu Omer Tisnachamu. He says, you should be comforted. Now, Heichi Dami, what case is he saying this in? Is this the response he's giving to people who are comforting him, or is this what he says when he's comforting others? If this is when he's comforting others, when others are comforting him, Amar Lehu Ihu Tis Nachamu. So if he then responds to them that you should be comforted, Nachsha Karamilu, what is he giving? He's giving them a bad omen. Right? He's basically telling them, right? He's like, you should be comforted. Well, they have no reason to be comforted. There's nothing bad that happened. So is he wishing something bad upon them? Elis, or rather, Ki Menachim L'Achrini. This is when he comes and he is giving a nichum and he's giving a comfort to others. Amar Lohu Tisnachmu. That's what he says to them. He says, you should be comforted. That's how the Kohen Gadol comforts mourners. Shramina. Okay, now let's talk about kings for a while. Melech Lo Dan. The king, he doesn't judge. Right, he can't judge. Right. So we had the question that Aviv asked, what about Shlomo HaMelech? So Amar of Yosef Rava says, Lo shanu ela malchi Yisrael. This rule talks about the Yisrael kings, right? The kingdom was split into two, Yisrael and Yehuda, and Malchus Beis David was separate from Malchus Yisrael. Malchus Yisrael, they're not allowed to come to court. They're not allowed to judge.
So King Solomon was part of
from Malchus Beis David, and so therefore he's fine, he can judge, right? Aval Malchi Beis David, Don Vidon and Osan. That's no problem. Dichsiv, the pasuk says, Beis David, Ko Amar Hashem, this is what Hashem says, Dino la boker mishpat, your judgment should be like the morning. We used this pasuk before when we wanted to indicate that when you know something very well and clear, like the morning, then you should say it, but the pasuk is talking about the Malchus Beis David, that he would judge in the morning. Ve'im lo daininon lei, Inhu hechi daini. If he is not able to be judged, how could he be a judge? V'aksiv, didn't we learn the pasuk hiskoshu v'koshu? First, you've got to straighten yourself up, then you can straighten up others, which means you have to be able to be judged in order to be able to judge others. And the pasuk clearly says he can judge others, therefore he must be able to be judged. V'amar Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says, "Shat atzmacha v'achar shat acherim." This is what you have to do. Take care of yourself, then you can take care of others.
Malchus Yisrael, meaning the time of the split of...
Yes.
That's when it was referring to.
That's correct. Or any other king that is not from Shevet Yehuda, as we're going to see. This, they're going to give an example of Ma'aseh Shaya. This rule actually didn't come into effect until the second base of Mikdash, which is actually after. So Malchus Yisrael is not talking about actually during the first base of Mikdash, which is when the Navi has Malchus Yisrael. So I initially thought yes until you just said that, and then I realized no. The story that we're going to have is going to be about Yanai the king, who is actually from the Chashmonaim.
Okay.
And the Chashmonaim is a Kohen, but he's Malchus Yisrael, meaning he's anybody but from David HaMelech's lineage. Okay? Malchus Yisrael, my time low. Why did they establish that Malchus Yisrael could not? Mishum Ma'aseh Shai, because of a story. De Yanai Malka, the servant of Yanai the king, Kotel Nafsha. He killed somebody. Some say this servant was Hordus, right, who is known in Baba Basra. He killed a whole bunch of the...
Yanai the king, what do we know about him?
So he was Yanai the king. So we know that Yanai the king potentially... It's a lot of things we potentially know about Yanai the king. Potentially he was Yochanan HaTzadik, that he was originally the Kohen Gadol, one of the children of Matisyahu became Kohen Gadol, but he turned into a tzduki at one point and went off the derech. And so his name was Yanai. Now the Chashmonaim took over after the miracle of Hanukkah, and they never relinquished the kingship, which was a slight against them. So Yanai was considered he was considered a tzaddik. Then he went off and became a rasha. Then he does tshuva again later. But you see, he has some negatives. There's a negative part to his reign as well, and his servant is potentially Hordus, who kills off the entire rest of the Chashmonaim and takes over and usurps the kingdom for himself. He winds up killing many of the sages of the time and then regrets it and asks how he can fix things and winds up rebuilding the second Beis HaMikdash. It was originally made of wood, a wooden simple structure, and he makes a beautiful second Beis HaMikdash as a result. Hordus was also known for building Masada and other lots of different buildings and forts in the area. So that could be who this servant is. Could be.
Wait, Shlomo Melech built the Beis HaMikdash.
The first Beis HaMikdash.
Right, but you said it was out of wood?
The second Beis HaMikdash. Ezra and when Ezra came back, right?
Wood.
So that's correct. Ezra and Nehemiah. So they came back. They didn't have money. They had very few people. They didn't have money. They put together what they could. Hordus comes along later and he builds it all up.
The first one was made out of bricks?
The first one was made out of stone, yes. Okay, so now that's what we know about Yanai, sort of. It's confusing. A whole bunch of stuff. There's like 4 or 5 pages in the back about who Yanai is, and it was confusing to me because lots of different conflicting viewpoints on who he is. But in any event, that's from the Chashmonaim era. The people who were involved here were big famous people. So his servant killed somebody. Amar lehu Shimon ben Shetach lechachamim Shimon ben Shetach. He said to the elders, "Tenu einechem bo v'didonenu." We've got to judge him, right? We got to bring this guy to justice. So shachulei avdecha katal nafsha. So shadru lehu. So he sent a message to Yanai, your servant killed somebody. So Yanai sent the servant, go ahead, judge him. So shachulei ta'ant nami lacha. You got to come too, because the pasuk says v'huad b'ba'alav, that when your ox or your money money causes damage, the owner has to show up in order to be present at the court. Right? The owner of the ox has to come and he has to be giving testimony about the ox. So also Yosef, so he came and Yanai listened and he came to the court. So Shimon Shetach says, Yanai Amelech, Amod al Ragelcha v'yi'idu b'cha. So he says, Yanai, stand up, give your testimony. Right? And that's a little bit, he seems like, so Yanai sees as a little bit disrespectful to be told he's giving testimony. You're not standing before us, you should know, so you're standing before Hashem. So you better listen. So, Shenemar's pasuk says, the two people who have the fight get up, and they stand before Hashem. Amar lo, Lo kishetomer ata el kemasha yomru chavercha. So Yanai says, you know what? I don't have to listen to you. What does everybody else here have to think? Which is kind of like a threatening statement, right? What does everybody else here think? So nifne lemino kavshu pnei bakarko. So he turned to the right and saw, and everybody puts their head down like this. Nobody wants to say anything. Nifne lesmola, look left, v'kavshu pnei bakarko, and they all put their head down to the ground. They don't want to get involved. Here's where they're a little bit intimidated by Yanai now.
So Yud Tes Amud Beis, right?
The Yud Tes Amud Beis. Thank you. Amar lehen Shimon ben Shetach. So Shimon ben Shetach said, "Bali machshavos atem." You guys are thinking in politics. You guys are big thinkers. That you can't stand up for anything here. So Yavo Bal Machshavos V'Yiframechem. Hashem, who is the real person who's in charge of all the thoughts, so he should come and take it out on you. Miyad ba Gavriel Hamalach came out from Shemayim, v'chavtam bekarka, and he smashed them into the ground, v'mesu, and they died. Be'osa Shah Amru, they then said at that time, Melech Lodan v'Lodanino, so the king cannot be judged, and he cannot judge others. Lomeid v'Lomeidino, so he can't give testimony, and they can't testify.
Is that part of the death sentence where he gets his head smashed into the ground?
That not he didn't. The judges did.
That's another death sentence.
Judges. Right? This was a spiritual. Gavriel did it, right? They didn't actually was not a carried out by Beis Din sentence. Okay. Next.
To the ground, right?
Yeah. Because they hid in the ground. They put their heads in the ground. Right. That's a good point.
Yanai's gematria 71. It's also interesting. Sanhedrin, because you're saying that.
Yeah. Very good. Okay. Lo chalitz v'lo choltzin. The king cannot do chalitza, and he does not do chalitza, and you can't do chalitza on his wife. Inni, is that true? Amar Rav Ashi, afilu manda amar nasi shema. So, then Rabbi Yehuda says he can if he wants to. Right? If he wants to do chalitza, he can. Right? Why doesn't he do chalitza? Because why don't they do chalitza to him? Because then the woman has to spit in front of him. That's disrespectful. So he can't do it. So what if he wants to? So he can, says Rabbi Yehuda. And is that true? Rav Ashi says, even according to the one that says a nasi, he is allowed to relinquish his honor. A king cannot. A king has to protect his honor against his will. He has no choice in the matter. Shenamar, the pasuk says, you should place a king upon yourself. That you should put your fear and awe should be upon him, right? So, mitzvah shani. The answer is, Rabbi Yehuda holds for mitzvah is different. That doesn't decrease your fear, awe, and respect for him to allow him to do a mitzvah. Ve'nosnin, and then we say, we cannot marry his wives. Tanya, we're going to write someone earlier, Yehuda, Noshim haruyos lo mi beis hamelech. How did, so Rabbi Yehuda explains, what? He said, well, wait a second. Didn't we see David married wives from Shaul's household? And it sounded like, so he said, no, that was the people who he was allowed to marry, i.e. the daughters of Shaul. Who were these women that he was able to marry? Meirav u'Michal, his daughter Shaul's daughters, Meirav and Michal. So Sha'olu Talmidav es Rabbi Yossi. So that his students asked Rabbi Yossi, Heichnasa David shtei achoyos. How was David Amelech able to marry two sisters, Meirav and Michal, or sisters? How can he marry both of them? Bechayehen. So Amar Lem, at the time of their lives, so he said to them, Michal achar misas Meirav nasa. He didn't marry Michal until Meirav died. Okay, so just remember that Shaul is king for only 2 years. So we're going to have this issue where Shaul fights the Plishtim. We're going to talk about all these stories that are going to happen. Shaul promises David to marry Meirav while he's already king. So David is this marriage to Meirav lasts less than 2 years essentially, because
aren't you allowed to have two wives?
Not if they're sisters.
No.
If they're sisters, they cannot. Okay, so now, Achar. So Okay, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcham, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcham says, Kiddushay Tos Hayu. They were never married. She was never married to Meirav. It was a mistake, right? The first marriage to Meirav was a mistake. There was a procedural problem in that marriage, and he was never married to Meirav. So, Kiddushay Tos Hayu Meirav. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, here's what happened. Tana is Ishti. Shaul and all of Kahal Yisrael are standing and facing off against the Plishtim. And Goliath comes out and he starts to taunt the Jewish people. And he says, anybody can fight me, then you can win the war. We'll have a one-on-one challenge. Anybody can fight me, and nobody can fight him.
That's what we saw David.
So Shaul says, anybody want to volunteer? David Melch says, I can do it. And he steps forward. And he says that's what he does. So Shaul says that anybody who wins, I'll reward him with riches, and also they can marry my daughter. So David says, okay, great. And he goes and he kills Goliath. Turns around and he says, okay, you're going to have to pay me. And we're going to see that story in a moment. Now, Shaul says, this conversation ensues. We're going to see exactly how that conversation went. But eventually he's supposed to be married to Meirav. Shaul never delivers Meirav. Shaul delivers Meirav instead to a fellow named Adriel instead.
Just like Yaakov and Lot.
Sorry?
Just like when Yaakov married Rachel.
Oh, you mean Lavan, right?
Lavan.
So,
Lavan,
yeah. So then Shaul says, okay, well, you can't marry Meirav because she's already married now. So how about marrying Michal, the second daughter? And then he makes a second deal. We're going to see in a moment. The second deal that Shaul says is, you've got to kill 100 Plishtim in order to be able to marry Michal. And in order to prove it, you have to bring 100 foreskins, right? That's okay. So that's yeah. Well, he's going to show. You got to prove it. That's correct. That's correct. That's like this a little bit of different scalping, right? So
Marry Michal. To marry Michal.
To marry Michal. Okay.
Funny, Gematria on Michal is 100 too.
So. Are you just doing the gematrias and all these things? That's amazing.
And then good.
Okay, so what winds up? Okay, so it's good. So anyway, so Michal, so Shaul doesn't deliver Michal either. He sends Michal off to Palti ben Laish instead, and that's what we're going to discuss. All these things that happened. Now, when Shaul dies, right? So now David comes along and demands from Shaul's family his wife, and he says, "Tana es ishti es Michal asher rasti lo b'mei arelos plishtim." Give me my wife Michal that I married her with the 100 foreskins from the plishtim. So my Talmudah. So what's the teaching here? Amar of Papa. Rav Papa says, "Michal ishti v'lo Meirav ishti." David HaMelech came along and he said, "Michal is my wife." But he never says Meirav is my wife, because he admits there was some procedural difficulty in the marriage that he had with Meirav, never occurred. My Kiddushay Tos, what was the mistake? The pasuk says, "V'haya ha'ish asher yakenu ya'ashrenu hamelech osher gadol." The one who is going to kill Goliath, the king is going to make him very rich, and he's going to give him the daughter. Ozo katle, so David went and killed him. Amar lo, he says, Milva islach gabai. So the king says, I owe you a lot of money, right? I'm going to pay you a huge sum of money. So David says, no. Keep the money, and I will be using that money as the kiddushin, as the marriage ring to marry your daughter. So they go, great, wonderful. Problem is, the halacha is that you can't marry a woman with loan forgiveness. You actually have to give something.
Right.
So therefore, he's not giving something. He only forgave something. It had a high value what he forgave, but that wasn't actually giving anything.
That's the reason. One of the reasons why you give her a ring under the chuppah.
That's why you give her. Well, yes, that's why you have to give, right? But you have to give something. David never gave anything. Hence, there was an error. So that marriage never took place. So what did Shaul do? Adriel. He gave Meirav over to Adriel afterwards. The pasuk says, "Vayi ba'es teis as Meirav ba'Shaul David." When it was supposed to be time that he gave, that Meirav was supposed to be given to David, he gave it to Adriel instead. Amar lei, I boyis de asan lach de'atein lach Michal. If you want that I should give Michal to you, zil aisi li mea arelos plishtim. Go bring 100 arelos, the foreskins of the plishtim. Also aisi le. So he did it. Killed 100 plishtim, and he comes back. Here you go. Amarle milva prutis lachkabai. He says, okay, great. So what's going on? I owe you a lot of money still, the riches that I never gave you, and you are forgiving the loan and handing me the 100 foreskins. What are 100 foreskins worth?
Shavei Pruta.
Yeah, maybe a pruta. Maybe, right? There's not a lot you could do with them. So, therefore, Shaul Savar, Shaul held, Milva upruta dase a milva. If you're telling somebody, I'll forgive the $1 million you owe me, and also here is a pruta, so what's the main part of that? The main part is the loan forgiveness. Hence, the pruta is an irrelevant portion of this transaction. Right. Since it's an irrelevant portion of the transaction, it's like it never occurred. Hence, you're still not married. Didn't work. David savar milva pruta dasea pruta. David says, no, if there is a loan forgiveness, but I'm intentionally giving you something worth a pruta, that was the reason I gave you the thing worth a pruta in order for the marriage to take place. Therefore, the marriage was 100% valid. David insists later on. The marriage is valid, and she is my wife.
Wait, was it worth a pruta? Because
it's a great question.
Do you think there'd be some value to 100? I don't know on eBay or what. What David did, it was an accomplished act. You think there'd be
like a trophy or some collector's item?
I don't know. Not that I can put a value on it anyway.
So we have to figure out what they'd be used for. That's the big question. So hang on, the Gemara's will ask that. V'boy same, or else if you want, the argument was like this: Dekuli am milva pruta dase pruta. No, everybody would agree that if David HaMelech had forgiven the loan and given something worth a pruta, that in fact would have been valuable. But Shaul Savar lo chazav midi, he says that the 100 foreskins have zero value. There's nothing they could do with them. But David said, no, chazul kalbi v'shunri. Go ahead and throw it to the dogs or the cats, right? Pet food. So therefore, it has value. For Rabbi Yossi, hi, tnos ishtias michal my darshbe. Okay, now Rabbi Yossi said that this was according to this version where he never married Meirav, and Meirav doesn't die, right? He never marries Meirav, he only marries Michal. What about Rabbi Yossi, who said he did marry Meirav? So how does he interpret the pasuk that says at the end, give me Michal, my wife? Well, I mean, Meirav was also his wife, so what does that mean? So Rabbi Yossi Latame, Rabbi Yossi going according to his reason to Tanya, we learned by Rabbi Yossi Hayadorish Mikros Me'urovin. Rabbi Yossi said that these psukim are in sort of mixed up kind of in order. Ksiv, the pasuk says, Vayikach HaMelech Shnei Bnei Ritzba Bas Aya, that David, the king, David HaMelech, had a unfortunate debt that he had to repay. The Givonim were angry at Shaul, and they were starting up with Kahal Yisrael. And they came and they said, since Shaul caused us great loss, David HaMelech, you can repay us back by delivering 7 children of Shaul's family to us to kill in exchange.
It's like a cartel situation.
It was like that, yes. So amongst them, he took the 2 sons of Ritzba Bas Aya Shayaldo Shaul, which were born to Shaul, as Armoni, Ves Mephibosheth. He gave him Armoni, Mephibosheth, Ves Chameshes Bnei Michal, and the 5 children of Michal, Asher Yaldo Adriel, that were born to Adriel Ha Mechulasi. Now, Vechila Adriel Nasna. 1 second. That says Michal. That Michal gave birth to Adriel. Michal did not marry Adriel. Michal married Palti ben Laish. It was Meirav who married Adriel. So v'halo palti b'loyish nasna. Dichsil pasuk says v'shal nasan as Michal bas ishtel shel Eishes bas as Michal biso Eishes David lepalti b'loyish. Ella makish kiddushay Meirav ladriel le kiddushay Michal lepalti. The reason why the pasuk is saying this in all this mixed up way is in order to tell us that the marriage between Meirav and Adriel is the same as the marriage between Michal and Palti ben Loyish. Makish Michal Palti ba'avera, just like the marriage between Michal and Palti was a sin, because Michal was actually married to David. Af kiddushay Meirav la'Adriel ba'avera. Also, the marriage from Meirav to Adriel was also in Avera because David was really married to Meirav as well. Okay. The only difference is, as we're going to see, that Meirav and Adriel had 5 kids. Right? We're going to see that Michal does not. We'll see in a moment. For Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha Nami Haksiv es Chameshes bnei Michal. Now, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, what does he do with the pasuk that says the 5 children of Michal bas Shaul? So why are they called Michal's children? So Rabbi Yeshua explains. V'chi Michal Yalda, they weren't Michal's children. V'halo Meirav Yalda, they were Meirav's children. However, according to Rabbi Yeshua, remember that Meirav dies. Right? And how did she?
And here we see she didn't really die.
She does die. She is dead. Right? But now, Meirav Yaldo, Michal Gidla. What happened is Meirav died and gave birth to these 5 kids, and then she died, and Michal raised the kids. Lefichach Nikro Shema, therefore they are called her kids. They're adopted. Those were her 5 adopted children. Lamdecha Shekoha Megadol Yosom B'Tok Peso tells us that anybody raises an orphan in their house, Malav Akasav Ki'ilu Yaldo, the Torah considers as if they are your children. Next is Rabbi Chanina Omer Mehacho. I think we had that in Maseches Baba Basra. Didn't we learn that also?
About what?
That adopted children are considered your children? I think I remember that from Baba Basra. Maybe I'm wrong. Rabbi Chanina Omer Mehacho. Rabbi Chanina says as follows. But where's the proof that somebody grows up in your house as though as you are their parent? Because the pasuk says, "Vatikrena lo hashchenos shem limor yulad ben linami," that they named this child that Rus had. The people named her, saying that Nami had a child. V'chi Nami yalda, that Nami didn't have the child. Rus had the child, right? Mm-hmm. Rus marries Boaz, and they have the child, and why are they saying it's Nami's child? V'halo Rus yalda, ela Rus yalda, but Rus gave birth to her. V'Nami gidla Rus, but Nami was the one who raised her. Right. Therefore, lefich nikral shema. That's why the child is called Nami's. Rabbi Yochanan says, here's the source. V'ishto haYehudis yalda asher yarad Avigdor. There was the woman Yehudis. Gave birth to the following: Yalda, Yarad, Avigdor, and a whole bunch of other names. These are all names of Moshe, the same person, even though it looks like this is a pasuk that tells us about all these children of this person, Yehudis, that she has many children. All of the children are the same person. They are, pasuk is fully quoted. Yered, Avigdor, Chever, Avi, Shocho. Rashi goes through and explains how each of Yekusiel, and Zanoach, these are all the different names of Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay? Now, this is also, so who is this woman, Yehudis, that gave birth to Moshe?
He had 42 names, right? Or was that my
10, I think, right? He had 10?
It was 10?
Yeah, I think so. Ella b'nei Basia bas Paro, asher lakach lo mered. So, Ela b'nei Bisya, these are the sons, these are all the children of Bisya bas Paro. Bisya or Basia, depending on how you vowelize that. The daughter of Paro, she's Ishto Yehudis, she's the Jewish wife. She's Yehudia because she converted. And Basia Bas Paro, this is the mother of this person who has 10 names.
Who's the daughter of Paro?
Sorry?
And who's the daughter of Paro?
Bisya, yeah. Right, the Bas Paro. And she married a fellow named Mered. Who's Mered? Zekalev. Kalev married Basia Bas Paro, and that is who was, I guess, credited as Moshe's father-ish. V'lama nikra shemo Mered. Why is she called Mered? Shemar Batzis Meraglim, he's called Mered because he rebelled against the spies. So therefore he's called Mered. V'chi Bisya Yalda, 1 second. Basia is not Moshe's mother. V'alo Yocheved Yalda. Yocheved is Moshe's mother. Eli Yocheved Yalda. Yocheved gave birth to her. Basia Gidla. But Basia raised Moshe in the palace. Therefore, she's considered to be his mother in the pasuk. Levicha Nikral Shema.
So Basia is the one that found him in the basket or whatever.
That's correct. Rabbi Elazar Omer Mehach. Rabbi Elazar says from here, Galta Bizra Amcha B'nei Yaakov, that you have redeemed with a outstretched arm your nation, the children of Yaakov v'Yosef Selah. V'chi Yosef Yalad. These are not the children of Yosef. The Jewish people are not the children of Yosef. Only Yosef's children of Yosef. All the rest of the Shvatim are not children of Yosef. V'halo Yaakov Yalad. All the tribes are from Yaakov. Ela Yaakov Yalad v'Yosef Kilkel. But rather, Yaakov was the one who was the father, but Yosef gave them all food. In this week's parsha, right? In last week's parsha. Therefore, they are called by his name. Amar Rabbi Shmuel, Bar Nachmani, Rabbi Shmuel, Bar Nachmani says, Rabbi Yonasan, Kol Malamed ben Chaveru Torah Malalav Kasav Kilu Yaldo. Anybody who teaches his friends child Torah, it's as though he gave birth to him. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, Ve'ela told us Aaron and Moshe. These are the generations of Aaron and Moshe. Uksiv, and then the pasuk says, Ve'ela Shmos b'nei Aaron. Only tells you Aaron's children. Lomercha, to tell you, Aaron Yalad. Moshe. Aaron was the father. Moshe limaid, but Moshe was the one who taught them Torah. Lefichach nikra Shmo. Therefore, the children are considered to be Moshe's. Lachain, the pasuk says, because he called them Torah. That's right.
Interesting.
Right, it also says, so says Hashem to the house of Yaakov who redeemed Avraham. Where do we see Yaakov redeeming Avraham? Yaakov never redeems Avraham. Amar Rav Yehuda, and in fact that's a word on this week's parsha. Yaakov is called a zaken. In this week's parsha, he's the first one who got sick before he died. He's called a zaken. It's really the first time in all of the Torah we ever see any psukim about a grandfather having a relationship with his grandchildren. Right? So he's like, Yaakov is the first grandfather. Because he
zaken means elder, right?
He's the elder, but also like a grandfather. So he he gives a bracha to Ephraim and Menashe, his grandchildren. We don't really see Avraham having a relationship with Yaakov, right? So where's Yaakov redeeming him? So Rav Yehuda shepado mitzar gidul banim. What happened is that Yaakov was able to take the place of Avraham in that he is the one who raised the 12 shvatim. The pasuk says, "Lo ata yevosh Yaakov." You don't have anything to be embarrassed, Yaakov. V'lo ata yevosh Yaakov me'aviv. You have nothing to be embarrassed from your father. V'lo ata panav yechavru me'aviv aviv. You don't have to be white from your grandfather. You did both Yitzchak and Yaakov favors in that you took on the responsibility of raising the 12 shvatim, even though they invented Judaism and got the whole movement started. You're the one who took on this responsibility and the difficulties of raising the 12 children, 12 tribes. Ksiv, the pasuk says Palti, Ksiv Paltiel. Palti ben Laish, back to him. He is called Palti, he's also called Paltiel. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan says, Palti Shmo, his name was Palti. Velama Nikra Shmo Paltiel, why is he called Paltiel? Shepaltu El min Avera, Hashem helped him be saved from an Avera. Ma'asa, what did Palti do? Here is Michal. Michal is being given to him as a wife. What does he do? He takes a sword, puts it in the middle of the bed. Amar, he says, Kol osik b'davar zeh, yidakar b'cherv zeh. Anybody who gets involved in this Avera is going to get stuck by this sword. Right? So this way he kept himself separate from Michal. V'haksiv, and it says, Vayelech ita isha, she'na'asa la ki isha. So it says, but wait a second. It says that when Michal was being returned to David, so her husband went with her. Well, what do you mean? It's not her husband then. He was not really married, and he admitted that. The answer is that he treated her like a husband. Rashi says that he honored her and he loved her, but he never had any relations with her. The pasuk says halachu bacha, that he was crying al hamitzvah azomine. He was going and crying. Why should he be upset? He's returning somebody who's not his wife. The answer is he was losing a mitzvah. Right? He had this opportunity every single night. He had this mitzvah that he was able to rise to the occasion, and now he's going to lose out on that. Ad Bachurim, until his place called Bachurim, which we interpret homiletically. Shnasu Shnehem Kebachurim. The two of them were like Bachurim in that they never had relations. Shalotamutam Bia. They never had relations. Hamar Rabbi Yochanan Tokvo Shel Yosef Anvasanuso Shel Boaz. The strength of Yosef is nothing compared to what Boaz had to go through. Because, as we're going to see, Tokvo Shel Boaz on Vasnuso Shel Palti ben Laish. And what Boaz had to go through, the temptation of Boaz, nothing compared to Palti ben Laish. Tokvo Shel Yosef on Vasnuso Shel Boaz. How is Yosef's nothing compared to Boaz? The pasuk says, Vahi b'chatzi alayla v'yechar ish v'yalafta. What happens is Yosef runs away from Potiphar's wife. Right? She's a married woman. They were hiding from everybody. Boaz wakes up in the middle of the night, and there's this woman sleeping in the bed with him, right? And so the opportunity was easier, and she's not married, and he doesn't do anything. V'yalafta, my v'yalafta was v'yalafta lefes is a turnip, right? Amar Rav shenasa b'saro kirashi liptos, that his flesh turned like a turnip. And Rashi explains that he was physically preparing for bia, right? Physically prepared, right? So that's a euphemism. Okay, we're going to turn the page to Daf Chaf Amud Aleph. Tokvo Shel Boaz and Vanaso Shel Palti ben Laish. This strength of Boaz was nothing compared to what Palti ben Laish had to go through. Kida Amran, like we said, Palti ben Laish had to go and deal with this every single night. Right? Boaz had to sustain himself one time. Right. Palti ben Laish has got a woman living with him every day. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan says, "My dichsiv," was the pasuk when it says, "Rabos banos asu chayil." There were many daughters that did great things. V'atalisa kumi, you're greater than all of them. Rabos banos asu chayil. Ze Yosef u Boaz. This is talking about Yosef and Boaz. They did accomplish great things. V'atalisa al kolona, but you're greater than everybody. That's Palti ben Laish. That's Palti ben Laish. He was on a higher level than both of them. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman says, Amar Rabbi Yonasan, "My dichsiv sheker achein v'elav yofi." How do you explain the pasuk sheker achein, that charm is false and beauty is nothing? Sheker achein ze Yosef, that he had chen of a hevel yofi, and Boaz was yofi. He was oz, he was strong, so he is also hevel. Yiras Hashem, the one who's fearing of Hashem, he tisavol ze Palti ben Laish. Davaracher, another explanation. Sheker achein ze dor shemo. Sheker achein is the door of Moshe. Zacharti la chesed nurayich, that the children people were found chen in the eyes of Hashem. So that's in Moshe's generation in the desert. For hevel yofi ze dor shel Yeshua. The yofi generation that's a little bit better is Yeshua's generation. Yiras Hashem Yitisal, but the best, the one that fears Hashem the most, is the Dorsha Chizkiah. That is the generation of Chizkiah. We talked about that Chizkiah Melech was close to being the Mashiach. That generation learned Torah, and there was nobody, they couldn't find anybody who didn't know Torah in all of Klal Yisrael. Davarach, another explanation, Sheker Achein is the Dorsha Moshe v'Yoshua. Sheker Achein is both the generation of Moshe and Yeshua. Havel Hayofi is the Dorsha Chizkiah, is the generation of Chizkiah. Yiras Hashem Yitisal, the Yiras Hashem, Zedorshal Yehuda b'Rabbi Eloi. This is the generation of Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Eloi. What happened then? Amrulav Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Eloi. They said about Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Eloi, Sheyishisha Talmidim Miskas Metalas Achas v'Oskim Torah. 6 students could share one blanket and learn Torah all together. Such was the achdus and the unity amongst the students, right? That they were so close together and cooperative. They didn't all worry about their own things, and so they had both learning and the ability to all work together. This is a good place to stop here.